Hi, I'm Lee. I'm one of the co-founders of Global Street Art. May the 4th is a known date around the world for Star Wars fans. It's a chance for fans to get together and celebrate. And Star Wars is obviously hugely popular around the world. So to paint something in honor of that has been a lot of fun. And Nacho's a brilliant artist. He's a force of nature. He's really fast when he paints, and it's amazing that he was able to produce this mural on his own, really, in just 2 days.
Welcome to Out of Home Insider, the first podcast for media and marketing executives that connects how offline attention drives conversion. My name is Tim Rowe, and for the past 3 years, I've been interviewing guests about their unique experience in bridging this misunderstood and undervalued opportunity for brands to create alchemy in the real world. Today's guest is Benjamin Fishlock. Benjamin is the head of client strategy at Global Street Art, a platform and organization that brings together artists, brands, and enthusiasts to promote and support the street art culture around the world. The audio you heard just before the intro was ironically a video posted this morning by one of the co-founders of Global Street Art, celebrating not only May the 4th with the global Star Wars community, but also living the ethos of GSA. Throughout the episode, Ben and I discussed the different jobs that out-of-home advertising can accomplish for a brand and how the environment plays a crucial role in shaping consumer behavior and ultimately in driving outcomes. He stresses the importance of simplicity and creativity in outdoor advertising and how creating celebrity status can be a force multiplier in the ongoing battle for share of voice and share of market. It was Leonardo da Vinci who said that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. So the big idea I'd like you to consider during this episode is that: how can you simplify something that unlocks value today? Concept, it could be the next conversation you have, the next email that you send. Anything. How can you create the same value or more by doing something more simply? So, without further ado, let's go.
Welcome, everybody, to the Out of Home Insider Show, a podcast like no other, hosted by the one and only Tim Rowe. Get ready to have some knowledge dropped on you and to be entertained, because nothing's more valuable than food for your brain. So sit back, relax, we're about to dive in as the best industry podcast is about to begin.
Ben, I'm super excited for this conversation. It's been a long time coming. We connected at the end of the year last year and have been having this really exciting dialogue about hand-painted art. So it's not a topic that we've covered here before, and I'm excited to go deep on you because there's so much here. There's high-level marketing concepts. There's really strategic, tactical elements to this conversation that we're going to have, but I couldn't be more excited to have you here. Thanks so much for being a guest.
Oh, Tim, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's been a long time, and I've enjoyed following your LinkedIn in particular, and of course your podcasts. So great to finally connect.
Definitely. Well, I'm gonna come out hard. I'm gonna ask you a tough one out of the gates, but it's something that I know you're prepared to answer for our audience. Why does outdoor work?
Oh, wow. So I'm going to use someone else's quote here to really summarize my viewpoint on out of home. There's this amazing chap called Richard Huntington from Saatchi & Saatchi who had a quote which I probably turned into my own quote over time. So apologies, Richard, if I've tweaked this. But essentially, outdoor works not simply because you see the message, but because everyone around you sees the message, and everyone around you knows that everyone else also saw the message. So there is a real sort of social proof and cultural imprinting piece when it comes to outdoor advertising, which makes it hugely unique and really flips it on the head in terms of customers making their own assumptions about a brand and buying into a brand rather than having a brand thrust upon them, which is becoming all the more common with many other kind of advertising formats.
That is the truth. And you come at this from a unique perspective. Your origin story, like so many folks in out of home, has touched different pieces of the industry to really become holistic and inclusive of a full funnel methodology. Maybe give the audience a sense of your background. Where'd you start? How did you get into this crazy game of out of home?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been quite a long journey, 15 plus years in out of home. I actually started off in a marketing role for a university. And this was my kind of job out of uni after doing a quick internship at Ogilvy and Mather, which was a lot of fun. I got married very young, so I got married literally 2 days after I graduated out of uni.
Aggressive.
So
I like it.
Yeah. So that was 18 years ago. Gosh. So I spent 3 years working in marketing for a university. And actually, I bought some out of home from Titan Outdoor in that marketing role, some billboard advertising on our 48 sheet kind of classic formats, plus some rail 6 sheets. Interestingly, there are 2 different shaped 6 sheets in the UK. There's the USA sort of ad shell size, which is exactly 5 foot tall by 3 foot wide.
Okay.
And there's a European 6 sheet, which is more of a sort of JC based design, which is a 1.2 meters wide by 1.8 meters tall. So very slightly different in shape and size. So it's quite interesting that format is not quite ubiquitous.
That's interesting. So you as first time marketing role, you're using multiple different out of home formats. Was it something that you had studied at university or what, like, had an interest in, or how did you start there? Not a lot of people I don't know that a lot of folks just start with out of home.
There was already a romance of out of home that I'd kind of had, especially studying advertising and marketing at university. And I was always really interested in out of home and seeing all the little names at the bottom of the billboards, waiting at the bus stop on the way to school as a kid. So it genuinely interested me and fascinated me. And yeah, it was really fun to start my out of home journey as a customer. I was so impressed with working with Titan, it was at the time, mainly on rail advertising and a bit of roadside. And we ended up buying the home ofs at the train stations as well, which is essentially kind of sponsoring a train station, which, yeah, that was really interesting. So I basically started off there, spoke to the guy that I bought lots of formats from, and ended up having an interview with his manager and took a job at Titan. This must have been, gosh, that was 15 plus years ago, just over 15 years ago. Then from Titan, I stayed at Titan for just over 2 years. And then all of a sudden, JC.Co bought half of the UK Titan business.
Sure.
So the roadside billboards went to a company called PrimeSite, and the roadside estate, that went to PrimeSite, and all of the rail and retail environments that Titan had in the UK were sold to JC.Co. And it was actually Jeremy Mayle at the time, who's now the CEO of one of your big outdoor giants.
Actually, I'll see Jeremy Mayle tomorrow. I don't know when this episode will get released, but on the timeline of history, I will see Jeremy tomorrow.
So he was heading up that, the acquisition at the time of Titan's rail and retail. So I stayed at JC.Co in a local sales role, really, for 2 years, and then went on to kind of management roles at PrimeSite, heading up first off the London team, and then a kind of UK-based role, looking after 3 or 4 different teams. And then from there, I went to Exterior Media, who looked after tube and bus advertising, 2 formats I really wanted to work with. And that was a much more sort of strategy-based role. And then Global, who were a huge radio giant, also decided to buy 3 out-of-home companies in the space of about 2 weeks, of which one was Exterior Media, and they'd already bought PrimeSite, who I'd already previously worked at. So kind of all of my history came together. There's some formats in the UK that I've sold with 4 different badges on over the last 15 years. And yeah, Global really did jump into that space and really move the dial, I think, for an out-of-home and a radio model combined. So that was quite interesting.
And I think maybe just for a little bit of perspective, because we're having a conversation with the global audience, oftentimes, historically when we've talked about out of home on the podcast, it's been mostly focused on a kind of a US footprint. I think the significance in the story there is that you've become so romantically involved with this inventory that is compressed into a smaller geographical footprint. You've seen the same brands or new brands. You've seen how the landscape of out of home has evolved with advertisers and formats. And one of those pieces that I really appreciated from our initial conversation was around a concept we've talked about here on the podcast a lot, the relationship between share of voice and share of market, the available attention of the audience that you want to talk to, and how that materializes as your own market share as a brand in your category and the thing that you sell. You have a unique thesis to this, and the element of adding fame to share of voice and how that materializes. And I think that that's really the power of hand painted art. Talk about that. Break that down for folks that we just threw a lot of concepts right there, right? Share of voice, share of marketing, share of voice plus fame equals share of marketing plus, right? What does share of voice look like in your world?
Love this. Well, I did. So when I was at Exterior and Global, mainly looking at London Underground advertising campaigns and bus advertising. So it's interesting. The sort of share of voice that can be gained just across those two environments in the UK is enormous. Bus advertising reaches 9 out of 10 adults every 2 weeks.
Wow.
So there's the density of out of home in the UK being, it's a £1 billion industry, and we're not the biggest country geographically. So out of home campaigns really are pretty hard hitting in the UK. So I actually did a lot of work, particularly at Exterior and Global, looking at share of voice gain, mainly through share of search. So I had quite a lot of real-time case studies, really looking at using tools like SimilarWeb or Google Trends to actually see uplifts in share of search, which is essentially a good proxy for kind of share of market gain. But yeah, in essence, the work of kind of Les Burnett and Peter Field and the long and short of it fascinated me from when they first published that. And the work of people like Orlando Wood. So he produced the System 1 group I could spend about 3 hours just talking about their work. But essentially, there are two books I'd recommend, which are Orlando's books called Lemon and Look Out, which really look at how creativity...
We'll make sure to link to those.
Yeah, creativity plays a key role, really, in share of voice gain. So crudely speaking, and obviously I'm not quite as smart as Burnett and Field by a long shot, or the works of System 1, but there is a lockstep relationship between share of voice and share of market. So the greater your share of voice versus your competition, the greater your market share. So it varies a lot from category to category. I've been quite fascinated looking at this so say online fashion brands who are a fairly heavy spend category in out of home. Mm-hmm. It's harder to get share of voice gain because the market's so busy. Mm. But there are categories. Interestingly, the online grocery category, we had sort of this 10-minute market come through in the UK 2 years ago. So this was essentially getting groceries to your door within 10 or 20 minutes.
Oh, so yeah, there was a bunch of these popping up in the States here too. I think I don't know if any of them still exist. They all seem to fold pretty quickly.
Yeah, it was fascinating to see a category, almost a whole new category emerge, and the fight for share of voice driving share of market, and the importance of distinctiveness. Yeah, it was really interesting to have a kind of front seat with that. And again, bus advertising.
And what did you see? Did you see that play out?
Oh yeah. So I had a tracker on all of the brands in this category, and using SimilarWeb was essentially looking at their share of voice versus their share of market. And every time they did a big push on out of home, you would see a shift in share of search. So it's genuinely quite interesting to see this playing out. Bus advertising is something that I've really, really enjoyed working in over the years before I moved into hand-painted advertising. And a lot of that comes down to the cover that a bus can drive in a small area. So I'll get back to our previous point in a minute. But to give it a context, 70 buses going around London for 4 weeks clock up the equivalent mileage of travelling to the moon. So just over 240.
I mean, that's I think that's so. I think that this was a Chip and Dan Heath book made to stick, the human scale principle, right? Of that's a great way to frame it. You talked about it reaches 90% of the audience, and when you think about just the actual coverage, that's a ton. That's like, that's so much.
So in terms of kind of a visual shout for a brand that just needs to really get kind of the first step of mental availability, driving prompted or unprompted awareness, it's a fantastic medium for people to learn about something at that first start of the scale. Again, Les Binet did an incredible piece of work in the long and short of it around mental availability and share of mind. And there are sort of rungs, if you like, to mental availability. You've got prompted, then unprompted awareness, right through to salience being top of mind in your category.
Which is that unprompted recall.
Absolutely, yeah. So literally what pops in your head first when you think about a car manufacturer or Honda, a food brand or
McDonald's
or cheese. So it's...
I don't know. I don't need much cheese, I guess. You got me on that one.
So it's an interesting one. So, and then the final echelon, which is the hardest to achieve, which I'm most fascinated in, is fame. That is the being unforgettable and being absolutely top of mind within a category and unforgettable. So that is where my love affair with hand-painted advertising really kicked in. And that comes down to more than just reach. It's about dwell time. It's about costly signaling. So there's a huge amount we could cover here. But I guess going back to out of home. So the more creativity there is in out of home, the greater the share of voice gain. So System 1 have done some really clever work with share of voice amplifiers. So ESOV is just excess share of voice versus share of market, having a greater share of voice than your share of market.
Come back, run that one back. ESOV. Is this an acronym?
ESOV, yeah.
Okay, ESOV. Excess share of voice. I can speak. Excess share of voice. It's not coffee in this cup. It's just water. Excess share of voice. What does that mean?
So essentially having a greater share of voice than your competition, than your share of your market.
And does that just mean buying more media? Or is this where the creativity and the format selection and how you play the different elements off one another, is that a way to do it? Or is it just I have to outspend my competition?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And I think there is an argument for exactly what you've sort of posited there. So crudely speaking, so say if your market share is 10%, but your share of voice was 20% of the market, your market share would naturally grow because you're basically being seen or heard more than your competition. So there is a lockstep relationship between share of voice and share of market gain. But if you have a truly creative, distinctive, memorable advertising campaign, that's where you kind of hack it a bit, really. So you've essentially got an amplification of share of voice gain. So if you have ESOV, so System 1, and I might be misquoting them here, but they work to a plus 10 point ESOV for all of their plans.
Okay.
So if you then imagine you then look at the variable of creativity, if you have a 1-star advert, which is hard to remember, pretty naff, right up to the best advert you could have in out of home, or to kind of look at TV as an example, Super Bowl ads or Christmas adverts that score very well kind of on emotional response, their share of voice amplifier, their kind of ESOV at plus 10 points would be much higher, which basically means you get greater market share, greater traction in your category. The kind of half-life, I suppose, of remembering the ad and the brand is stronger, etc. So there is some really amazing work going on in that space, which is truly fascinating. And there's a lot of work around dwell time. There are some big players in the UK, Lumen Research, looking at kind of attention levels. I've been reading up on Karen Nelson Field's work on time and view, which is a lot of that is focused around online advertising and why a lot of it doesn't really cut the mustard.
And what have you found in that? Because I think that's continues to be an interesting conversation is out of home versus online. Do they work in silos? Do they work together? We know that they work together, but how do you, what are you finding in that research?
Yeah, good question. So for me, the role of out of home is so broad. You've got the jobs to be done vary from the kind of fame building stuff that I really love. So top of funnel out of home, if you like, tofu, terrible term.
Yeah, I'm a meat eater, but I love me some tofu when it comes to out of home.
So essentially, you've got top of funnel out of home, which is all about behavioral change, broad reach, driving emotional share of mind, really pushing the dial for mental availability. And then at the very bottom of the funnel, you've got sort of what we see more in the digital programmatic space, which definitely has a role as long as it's creative.
Mm-hmm.
We've got some great examples of that from brands like Specsavers in the UK.
Oh, so yeah. Specsavers all the time. I feel like they're making the rounds. They get it. They execute creatively and in a full format, practice.
Yeah. So from a kind of bottom of funnel out of home perspective, it's more about serving a behavioral prompt. So tight targeting, maybe focus more on physical availability and sort of driving relevant information. So the jobs to be done with out of home are so broad. What is genuinely quite frustrating is that sometimes brands don't know quite what they're going for until you see the creative. So from a media planning point of view, you should be building your plan around how you bring that idea to life, which formats work for that idea. And
start with the idea is what you're saying. Start with the idea and then find the media that brings that idea to life.
Absolutely. And in terms of deploying out of home, if you have something which is really about broad reach, but you've only bought, a very small campaign, or it's sort of spread very thin, you're not really going to kind of get the benefits. And the same with if you are serving a behavioral prompt, you really want to make sure you've got your targeting right and the physical availability right. Otherwise, it's going to be seen by people that aren't in market, and it's basically wasted and a bit pervasive.
And then we hear out of home doesn't work for me.
Absolutely.
It's not that there's no media that doesn't work. I've never seen a billboard take a day off. It's still standing there. It hasn't moved, and the creative's still up. And it's not falling off, right? All media works. It's to what degree. And you talk a lot about this idea of stop and stare versus stop and share. And I think that's a cool way to kind of summarize what does fame look and feel like. We've got a really deterministic way to do it with some of the system one elements that you're talking about, thinking about out of home as available space to be creative. And depending on how creative you are with that space really is your opportunity to exploit the value of the space you just bought. But what does that mean to create a stop and share moment? That seems to be like a great summary of creating fame, is that people are stopping. They're not just staring at it, but they're taking some next action. They're engaging with the creative. What does that mean, and how do you do it?
Yeah, great question. It definitely, for me, comes down to creativity. So if we think about creativity as pretty much a marketer's or a planner's secret weapon, it's the one thing we can control as marketers, creativity. And the return on investment for that can be, as much as 12-fold if you get creativity right and stand out versus your competitors.
Just by being creative, increasing the return, increasing the yield on whatever you bought. I think that's maybe thinking about it on a spectrum, right? Hey, I bought this space, I put up my brand message, and if it returns even with the market, right? Hey, I'm buying an index fund, and this index fund is hedging me from the market going up and down. Hey, I'm just going to put up a generic brand message that's tied and true. Or I could take a little bit of a gamble and do something that's more creative. And the risk reward profile changes with the creative risk that you're willing to deploy.
Yeah, I think creativity, whether it's driving distinctiveness or differentiation, it has a role to play in elevating a brand and how it's perceived by its audience. That's probably what helped draw me into the world of hand-painted murals. They are so unique. And from a kind of dwell time perspective, you typically see a hand-painted mural for a kind of longer period, which is really interesting. But from a costly signaling perspective, in out of home, you've got fame driving formats like anamorphic digital, which is seriously awesome.
Seriously awesome.
Builds.
Also called 3D, if you've seen a digital billboard that looks like a robot's coming out or something like that. That's what Ben's talking about.
Yeah, so they are, so you've got fame driving out of home formats from digital to special builds to hand painted adverts. So the difference about a hand painted mural for me is obviously it's been painstakingly crafted by an artist. So it's already imbued with a level of craft and talent that raises the bar from a creative perspective, which is a big part of why the potency really of hand-painted advertising and why people want to share it. And yeah, Rory Sutherland, I was listening to him on a podcast the other day. He's the creative director, and I'm sure he's a vice chairman as well at Ogilvy. But he had a kind of quote around costly signaling, which went beyond just spending money on something that looks expensive, essentially. So we could call that kind of peacocking. But he touched on another point, which is that any communication which involves a high degree of difficulty or scarcity in its creation is a more impactful communication.
Oh,
so a really nice line,
Love
really, that a brand that's got a sincere faith in itself, but also communicates itself in a way that drives those sort of exclusive feelings is onto a winner. And going back to the point that I didn't quite finish, the fame driving formats definitely have an impact when it comes to online advertising. So if you think about pay-per-click or SEO.
Sure.
Let's touch on Google search. So if you're searching for a brand by name, then obviously someone's actively already in their brain, the search engine of which brand am I looking up in my head goes straight onto the Google search. So you're not only...
Yes. That's Google is my taxi cab at that point.
Absolutely.
Taking me to where I want to be.
So you're searching up a brand, and if you're looking at metrics for kind of online search, brands that have high levels of named search versus generic search, they are being found because someone wants to find them. Whereas there are a lot of online advertisers who spend loads of money on generic keywords.
Like I sell widgets, right? Like, so and maybe we can use an example here of, you know what? Now I've thought of a cheese. I didn't think of a cheese before. Kraft macaroni and cheese, right? So it's the difference between somebody typing into Google Kraft macaroni and cheese and just macaroni and cheese.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there is definitely a role to play in being memorable, whether that's touching on salience or really on fame. Sentiment can be kind of implied as a bit of a proxy there if someone's typing in a brand. And what out of home is very good at is chiming with need states. And from a seasonal perspective, you obviously see certain categories spending a lot of money at key times in the year. So fashion typically is sort of February and September, you get these big spikes in investment. So there is something really lovely about out of home chiming with needs as a general.
As the seasons change, right? Like I do a lot of my shopping at the local farm stand, and not all of the same produce is in season all year. There are only certain vegetables and fruits that you can get at certain times of the year, and out of home has that sort of similar quality. And I think that it's a really unique point because it makes out of home not only more tangible and visceral, but what it really is, which is a piece of our organic environment.
Yeah.
As the seasons change, the advertisers change, and it's reminding us of the things that we need, or introducing new things that may be relevant to this time of year, the season that we're going through, personally, what have you. It's a really powerful concept.
I think brands do that very well with out of home, especially if you get we touched at the kind of at the beginning about what level of share of voice you need to cut through. And if the market basically conflates with seasonal need, then it makes sense to kind of go for broad reach and to tap into, and And weirdly, out of home does sort of become part of that story, doesn't it? It builds an environment which drives behavior in quite a unique way and in a way that we want it to.
It's a lot easier to sell bathing suits in the summer than it is in the winter. And that just makes it just makes sense. It sounds silly to say, but the market is primed for the message is ultimately the point. The market is standing there ready to receive what you're about to tell them. And this is an opportunity like the creative element to tap into a market that is already waiting for you. They're expecting to see you. Oh, they'd almost be surprised to not see you doing that. They would be surprised to see you selling bathing suits in the middle of the winter, which leads me to the next question I have here, which is how specifically does our environment influence our behavior, and not just our environment as consumers and where we see advertising, but I think one of the really unique pieces of Global Street Art, the company that you're at, is your founder's belief in creative and creating an environment, even just locally, internally, to stimulate these things. How does environment influence our behavior?
Great question. Absolutely. Yeah. So particularly for hand-painted advertising, every wall is a different unique shape and size. So instantly you've got these, whether it's a concrete canvas or a lovely, brick wall that's on the side of a 100-year-old building, something about the fact that they're all unique, I think the sort of non-conformist of out of home already makes them more interesting to consume, and probably implies that, a degree of scarcity comes into the role of kind of making that into an out-of-home canvas. So most of the murals we've got are all located in kind of cultural hubs. So typically very hipster areas where there is kind of a convergence of, art, music, and people, early adopters in certain areas of fashion or craft. So it's fascinating. The environment definitely does drive behavior. And I think with hand-painted advertising in particular, the craft that we are typically advertising is an extension of our work, if you like. So when you've got an amazing artist painting something to kind of photorealistic standard and people are watching this happen, this environment definitely is driving a different level of behavior, which is probably what lies behind these sort of stop and stare and stop and share moments. People genuinely want to celebrate human craft and brands that are really investing in creativity to a different level. And to some extent, taking a bit of a risk. It's out of home, typically in the UK, and this is very sad. Very sad. It's sad that a lot of brands see out of home as matching luggage to, either a digital campaign or a TV campaign, and it's often just about looking like themselves, looking distinctive across every.
We're just going to cover off here to make sure that we've got a well-rounded campaign versus giving it the time, right? Like producing a TV spot, of course, is a creative endeavor, and you can have variations, and there's some brands that do great television advertising. But at the end of the day, it's a 15 or 30-second video ad that's going to be shown inside of a box. There's not too many things that you can do with it. In fact, what stands out are so many brands that use out of home in their television commercials, which kind of comes back to this stop and share element of like great creative in the real world and the impact on social and that social proof piece. It is interesting to think about how out of home doesn't necessarily receive that same first thought consideration. So maybe for a brand that already has out of home live in the market, can you start from an endpoint where there's already a campaign and work backwards? Can you work backwards from established out of home creative to come up with great hand painted art?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think if you've kind of got assets already either running or about to get deployed for a brand, across all out of home formats, us working, with the same assets on hand painted mural sites, it definitely can still elevate the craft of the entire campaign. Because if you think about a wall it might be that it's got doors and windows in it, it's a weird shape.
Mm-hmm.
All of those elements we can work on, we quite often get given assets, high res assets that are being used elsewhere. And then
I'm giving you my mobile display ad and saying, hey, turn this into hand painted art on this crazy wall that spans 2 corners of a building.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we can bring the same look and feel. I mean, fluency is very important. Having a very distinctive look across all media, we can make sure we still encapsulate that. But the very fact that we're painting it painstakingly on, for example, a 2-sided building, we can still draw out all those elements of distinctiveness, but just add in that level of craft and creativity to really raise the bar and make it more than matching luggage, essentially. And if there was any element of the campaign that was going to get photos taken of and shared on social, then it would be the hand painted element. And if you think about outside of out of home, there really aren't many advertising formats anyone's ever going to share. It's quite unique to out of home in that respect.
Can't say I've ever shared a Facebook ad, other than maybe with someone who I wanted to buy the thing for me instead of me having to buy it for myself. Not because I was particularly blown away by the creative execution of the Facebook ad. And my friend Greg Wise at One Screen, he commented on this kind of early on in our own discovery while I was there, and that was that people congratulate one another when they do out of home. It could be the 100th time they've done an out of home campaign. The CMO, the VP of growth, somebody from the brand shares it on LinkedIn, and the comment section's filled with congrats. It's so unique. It's the only format I've ever seen people congratulate someone else on doing. Never seen anyone congratulate anyone else on any other ad.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it probably boils down to the fact that out of home almost it's a public promise, isn't it, from a brand? There is nothing more permanent than out of home. It's not like an ad that you quickly stick out on social and then delete if it's going wrong. There is a permanence, I think, to all out of home, digital and analog. And yeah, from a social proof perspective, putting yourself out there does demonstrate a sincere faith in yourself. And it goes beyond just brand awareness, brand associations, perceived quality, perceived loyalty. I think all play a role in that kind of cultural imprinting.
We've talked about a lot of formats. Do you have a favorite out-of-home format?
So I feel like I'm on a very self-indulgent journey moving into the world of hand-painted advertising. And it has become by far my favorite format. But I genuinely love all out of home. You can tell I'm still a bit of a bus nerd. There's probably still about 12,000 48-sheet paper billboards in the UK. So that's kind of your standard bulletin board. I used to know by numbers about the codes for about 2,000 of those. So my favorite 48 sheets across the country, I used to know the sort of the 4-digit site number and then the panel number associated.
I used to know the part number for, I was in the Marine Corps. I worked with helicopters. I used to know the part number by heart for the helicopter rotor blade for the CH-53. I don't remember it anymore, but I can appreciate having such an ingrained passion that those things are committed to memory. It's a huge piece of our being. I think it's so similar. I think it's the draw of the format, right? It's a lot of what we've talked about here today, that it's organic. It's a piece of the environment. It follows our seasons, right? It's part of our daily lives. And I think it makes sense why we have such a strong connection to it. Ben, a place I'd love for you to take us home on as we bring it back into the station here to use a tube reference, strategy as sacrifice. It's a quote that I have had written down. I'm going to come back and re-record it. It's a quote that I've had written down since the first time we talked. Strategy is sacrifice. And when it comes to out of home, that's almost table stakes. How would you, what's the lasting message if you could for the audience?
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. This is probably something I learned from Dave Trott or one of his books or podcasts. Essentially, the jobs to be done with out of home typically do involve fairly low level processing. It's quite a passive media on the whole. So essentially, an ad that tries to say too much is going to fail. It's a bit like if someone throws you a ball to catch, you're going to catch it. If someone throws you 10 balls at once, you won't catch any.
It's true.
So when it comes to creativity and when it comes to just simplicity, it's so important that we think about the audience and remember that us as marketers, especially out of home nerds that go around looking and taking photos of sites, that's not normal. Most people really need, we need a visual shout when it comes to out of home. We need to poke people in the eye, and creativity plays a key role here. But there's a few tools that I've used over the years. One of them is Dragonfly AI, and I've used other tools like it, which look at visual salience. And one thing,
kind of like a heat mapping for the out of home. What are people looking at?
So this isn't even talking about kind of emotional response, which is what System 1's very good at, looking at, if you can trigger the right hemisphere of the brain, then actually creativity plays a key role in, memory structures and likability. But the work of something like Dragonfly AI, purely to look at visual salience, their study, I'm pretty sure, shows that your pre-attentive state, essentially your System 1 brain, the right hemisphere of the brain, in the first 4 or 5 seconds, you can actually only contend with 5 visual elements. Anything more than 5 visual elements to an outdoor ad that you're only going to see for 5 seconds is going to dilute memory. You're never going to have anything that sticks that's beyond those 5 pieces.
So it's not that the piece is above. It's not that. So if you have more than those 5 elements, and those elements could be lots of different things, a picture of the product, some copy, a website, there's lots of different ways. So what it's saying is, if you have more than those elements, that you're really getting nothing. Nothing's retaining. It's not that, hey, if I have 6 or 7 elements, they're getting the first 5 and losing the last 2. No, they're not getting anything. Is that right?
Pretty much. So if you're not swinging the bat for simplicity and creativity, then it's going to be very hard to take anything away from the ad. And especially, say, for example, the logo's in the bottom right corner, and you're incapacitated by already looking at 10 elements or trying to read tiny copy on a roadside billboard, then you're never going to take away the bits that, that the brand wanted you to. The communications objectives definitely are flawed if you're trying to say more than those things. So 5 visual elements plus, whilst maybe driving a car or walking around with your phone, you've got
results may vary.
Absolutely. So it's a really good reminder that with out of home, if you can get someone to remember one thing, what is that? It's I've seen, especially in local advertising, I've seen roadside billboards that you only see for literally 3 seconds whilst driving, and they're brilliant if they're done well. But I've literally had campaigns that have had more than 100 words on them, and when you see the artwork and think, well, how's anyone ever going to retain all of that? So it's a good reminder that strategy really is sacrifice when it comes to making sure that you are focused on the objective being one thing, that you really are taking away when you see an out-of-home ad.
It's beautiful. I couldn't think of a better place to bring it home. Ben, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for being here.
Love it. Thanks so much, Tim. Brilliant.
Absolutely. If you found this to be helpful, please share it with somebody who could. Make sure to smash that subscribe button, and we'll see y'all next time.
quarter century, I finally came to my senses. I finally got my hand up on the tinted Benz, kid. I see the world clear through my tinted lenses. With the dream and the drive, the possibilities endless. Now print that, send this all the way to Tokyo. Take a trip down south, down to Mexico. Next stop, Shanghai, the world-class trade show. First class all the way, cause that's how we roll. Yeah, call us the rock star businessman. Rockin' shows, we handle business, man. We got our own future in the palm of our hands, cause divided we fall and together we stand. Old friends trip.